one of the more common ways to capture Agile requirements is the form of a thing called user stories. That kind of reminds me of the comic strip I read where the hero is looking at one of the stakeholders and saying, yeah, you gave me all these lists of things you want, but we have to capture each one of these in the form we call a user story. And the stakeholder said, okay, here's a story. Give me all the things I want or I ruin your life. Right? That's the kind of user story that we tend to run into. So what are these user stories? Well, user stories come from the world of extreme programming. It's one of the techniques that sort of came along the same time as Scrum, but often, like in real life, some things take off. Scrum took off. Extreme programming has sort of backed off a bit here, but it comes from that world. It was designed to capture needs, not the implementation. It was really designed to capture what are those problems that we need to solve, not how we're going to solve it. And they come in multiple sizes, from epic level huge things to epic level medium things to epic level small things to finally stories that could be implemented in a sprint, which we often call ready stories. So they come in all kinds of sizes and shapes, but you can treat them each one as a configured item that you can say, what state is this story in? Is it to be worked? Is it just in the backlog? Is it in progress? Is it done and signed off? So you can treat them as configured items so you can actually watch progress and change about how many of these things you've got done. Now, we technically say these are just a placeholder for requirements. Because remember, we talked about the decision to impose it only happens at the last moment. And so most of the life of a user story is just a placeholder to decide whether we're going to do it or not, right? Until we make that decision. And we intend to make that decision at the last responsible moment. Technically, only in the sprint planning meeting do we actually commit to saying we're going to impose that on our solution. So for most of its life, it's just a placeholder. Now, the user story, to actually understand it, you have to understand that they started out as physical story cards. Now, a lot of our techniques like the use of physical items. And so before you jump into some automated tool, really sort of live for a moment, if you can, in this idea of the physical item, the story card. And the story card has two sides. There's the front of the card. The front of the card has this idea of a title, description, estimate, and then there's the back of the card. The back had notes and acceptance criteria. Let's take a little more look at these things. Let's look at the front here. So here's the front of my card, right? It has that title, and that title typically follows a verb-noun format. That is, we say a verb, then something, and then a noun. This verb-noun format is famous and constantly used throughout the world of requirements in all different kinds of techniques, from user stories to use cases to activity models. The verb-noun format is all over the place. Then there's a textual description. It started out as a free text field. Just write down a short description of what that need is. But we saw that a lot of people were writing solutions in here. So in the mid-2000s, some people, bright people, came up with a little mini format here. They said, as a blank, I can, or I want, or I will, right? And what we were supposed to capture in there was the role, actor, person, and then for the I can, or after the I will, the need function kind of thing. Now, this is really helpful, but we still found that over in here for that I can, people would say, I can have IE latest version. It's like, and so we came up with one more little trick here. We put a so that down there. The so that was an attempt to help us escape the solution boundaries and get to that real need or real function. And finally, on the back of the front of the card, there's always an estimate. And the way that estimate is generated varies based upon where in the life cycle that card is and how big that card is. So that's the front of the card. Now, the front of the card is the part we're most familiar with. When most people think of user story, they think of just this description part right here. But we've got to think about user story as two parts. So I'll always talk about user story description and separate that out from the rest of the card. The back of the card has some pretty cool things too. The top are where we keep some notes. This is a great place to capture that solution that they want, right? Say, hey, looks like they want to use this solution. Because if they want to use a particular solution, it's good to remember that. Because if we do something different, we should start coaching them right away. Or they may have a great idea and we want to do exactly what they said. And then there's a section for the acceptance criteria. And notice the acceptance criteria should be talking about how well they do it. They have the non-function parts in there. And later on, we'll talk about having a tolerance on these things. That is, a set of range of values that you can actually be acceptable in, not just one point.